The White House says the cyber attack on Brazil's meat producer JBS likely came from Russia. U.S. officials say they're engaging with Moscow to hold the hackers accountable for the ransomware attack. To talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, it was the same type of attack recently used by a Russian-based criminal group that forced Colonial Pipeline to shut down for a week.
Right. So we're seeing a pattern here, right? Look, this is where we knew the future of attacks would be on the internet, on the cyber infrastructures of different very important sectors, whether it's energy grids or pipelines, and in this case, a meat production company that serves most of North America, having it shut down over the weekend, starting on Sunday when they informed the White House that this had happened. And the White House ensures everyone involved that they are looking into this and they are discussing this with Moscow. Unfortunately, what happened here is Moscow can basically, wipe its hands clean of this and say, it's not us, it's a private entity, and we will do our best to track it down. But what does that really mean? And is that even the truth? But the real takeaway here for everyone involved is to, really firm up these soft targets. And they're soft targets because, no one's going to war. There's no military involved. There's no bloodshed involved, but yet it does the most damage. And we're looking at Wall Street. We're looking at big companies. We're looking at insurance companies. We're looking at hospitals. We're looking at, anywhere where they're using, which is basically everywhere, this kind of apparatus that can be taken down. Ransomware is everywhere. I mean, look, individuals get hacked, and they get websites sent to them, and they get their social media hacked and emails hacked. So it's something where people have become more aware of these risks.
And that ransomware attack disrupted global production, including here in Alberta at JBS Foods in Brooks. Lisa, the attack was really felt around the world, wasn't it?
Absolutely. They had to stop production, which obviously will have a trickle effect, in Canada, here in the United States, and elsewhere where this is sent. We're facing an inflation here as is. I know you're feeling it in Canada, where they're talking about inflation in Europe. So, this doesn't help when a basic food item is, there's a halt in production. And now when they begin again, will there be a scarcity? Will there be, demand and, not enough supply? We're going to be dealing with this for a time, in terms of them getting back up on their feet. But we hope that they can at least learn from this, and that we won't see this in the dairy industry, we won't see this in the water supply, and we won't see this elsewhere in our most important infrastructures.
Lisa, Hamas is allegedly encouraging Palestinians to participate in a day of rage on Friday in an apparent effort to perpetuate continuing unrest with Israel amidst a very fragile ceasefire. What would that day of rage look like?
Violence, violence, and more violence. This is encouraging individuals to be, lone attackers. And look, there has been a ceasefire, and there have been already two or more attacks that have been reported on borders, stabbings, and such. And look, this is a day in the life. This is what Israel goes through day in and day out. But when you're only, a week into a ceasefire that has been internationally brokered, where you have all eyes supposedly on this ceasefire, and they're already breaking it, and no one's even reporting this, and now they're calling for a day of rage, which means more violence against Israel. And look, the truth is, how this is not just violence against Israel. When they call for a day of rage, it reverberates around the world, just like what happened between Israel and Hamas reverberated around the world. We saw anti-Semitic attacks from New York to Los Angeles to the streets of London, Montreal, and elsewhere. This is exactly what they want. Hamas is not a real political entity. It is a terrorist organization, and this is what it wants. It wants attacks against Jews around the world. It incites those attacks, and now, under a ceasefire, it is calling for a day of rage. And the bottom line here is that the mainstream media won't cover this. And Hal, thank you for bringing attention to this. But the mainstream media won't cover this unless Israel is forced to defend itself. And that's when the geniuses of the world will start opining, whether it's social media influencers or other celebrities, and saying it's an imbalance of power. It is an attack that is not warranted and such. So, we should keep our eyes on this, and understand the history, the contextual nuances here, and what Israel has to deal with day in and day out on its borders and elsewhere.
The incoming director of Mossad, or the National Intelligence Agency of Israel, David Barnia, gave a very threatening speech against Iran, including to potentially assassinate some of its nuclear scientists and attack on its nuclear facilities. Tell me more about that.
Right, and this is can't be taken out of context. The reason why Israel is speaking out against Iran and its nuclear program and its weapons program and its weapons depots is because Iran has doubled down. The regime has come back to say, we will replenish Hamas's weapons. We are going to provide them with financial and weapons aid and give them all the missiles they need to take Israel out. In retaliation, Israel is saying, listen, we're not going to go to war with Iran. We haven't gone to war with Iran, but what we can do is go after their assets in the region, and that's exactly what's been going on. There's been a proxy war where Israel has had to go take out, assets that Iran has had in Syria, and also in their nuclear facilities. In Natanz, for example, is a place where they are enriching uranium. Its most important location, actually. And that's exactly what Israel is forced to do, to preemptively take out these weapons because they know if Iran is building up its arsenal, where will it be directed towards? Of course, its sworn enemy in the region, the state of Israel.
The new Mossad chief, Barnia, also says that Iran is working on its dream of acquiring an atomic bomb, even as it holds talks with world powers on restoring the 2015 deal limiting its nuclear program.
Right. Isn't it amazing? Well, our leaders here in the US are at the table in Vienna to draw up another JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal, similar to the one that we had in 2015. But meanwhile, look at what's going on, on the periphery. Iran has increased its uranium enrichment up to 63%. It continues to, threaten the United States and Israel. It continues with its human rights abuses at home and elsewhere, and it continues to fund terrorism. Look, they're continuing to fund Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen and in Syria and in Iraq, and the list goes on and on. They are the number one world sponsor of terror, and that hasn't changed. But yet, for some reason, the Biden administration is after a deal, and I think they're going to get one very soon.
Now, still with Israel, the Israeli army recently destroyed a Syrian regime observation post established on the Israeli side of the buffer zone in the Golan Heights.
Right. So again, with Israel has to keep its radar up. It needs to see what is surrounding its borders, and Syria, of course, shares a border with Israel, and that is where the Iranian regime has beefed up its assets in order to have weapons and intelligence near the Israeli border. And guess what? The Golan Heights is Israeli property. And they said, well, if it's here, we're going to take it out. And that's exactly what they did. Israel has a very detailed intelligence and knowledge about these assets. And in order to keep its borders and its civilians safe, it does what it has to.
On any given day, the U.S. Navy has around 100 ships deployed around the world. Now, that's about a third of its current fleet and much smaller than during the Reagan administration back in the 80s when the Navy had close to 600 warships. Lisa, the new $715 billion Biden defense budget raised a few eyebrows among Republicans who complain it makes the U.S. vulnerable in a possible future war with China.
Right. So all we hear is about how China is beefing up its military. China is beefing up its assets. China is putting more ships at sea. And the Biden administration's plan to minimize or diminish our military presence, because after all, that's what they believe in. They believe in appeasement, and they don't believe in the military, and they don't believe in beefing up our assets, and they don't believe in defending our rights, whether they be militarily or in maritime war. And as you said, under Reagan and usually we have a higher or a more robust presence at sea than we do right now. And many people on the right in this country believe that this is the time to increase our presence, not decrease our presence, and particularly in light of the threat that China poses at sea.
Yeah, you're right. According to a recent survey by the Reagan Institute, China is now viewed as the U.S.'s greatest threat. Don't the Democrats and the Biden administration actually see what's going on and maybe have to address this, but like you said, beefing up its military presence on the seas?
A lot of the Trump era, standards, policies, changes have remained under the Biden administration because they are just logical, right? But a lot of them are really, they oppose their ideological stance, not the logical stance, the ideological stance, and it really goes against the evidence, and it goes against, the reality that we're dealing with. And this is one such instance when you look at the reality on the ground and you say, we can't afford to go along with your ideology. Just like at the southern border, we can't afford to go along with your ideology to keep our borders open because we can't absorb these people. We can't do it in a healthy way. We can't do it in an economic way. And we can't do it in just the sheer numbers. We can't bring in these people and give them jobs and homes and, comfortable life. And again, it goes back to their ideology, and they're gung ho on their ideology. And you know that because when they came into office on day one of this Biden administration, they did an about face on so many of the Trump era changes that were made. And we're just watching because a lot of this is really, really backfiring in such a way that people in this country are noticing. And Hal, we can't wait to get to a place where it's just nonpartisan, bipartisan, whatever you want to call it, but we just face the facts and we deal with them as they come.
Let's talk about North Korea for just a moment here. And that country fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles that are believed to be derived from a Russian missile system. Now explain why these missiles, Lisa, are a direct threat to the West.
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, North Korea is definitely chest thumping here and saying, "Hey, look at us. We had a real successful run this time around." But can we believe them? We were not so sure. They're known to exaggerate a lot. They're known to really emphasize the propaganda. And that's what they go on. We can't check what they have, so why they can just brag as much as they want. They can talk about it and really grandize what they have. But as you said, this is known to, or thought to have come from Russia. They're very happy with the test, and it poses a threat because they're rogue. We don't have any real tabs on North Korea. We don't know what they're up to. And again, under the Trump administration, we had 2 somewhat successful icebreaker meetings between the 2 leaders, but it didn't really manifest into anything formal, nothing in writing, no pact, no treaty, no handshake, nothing that would bring us to a place where we feel comfortable with them chest thumping as they are right now.
Is there a plan for Biden to meet with Kim?
Nothing yet, but who knows? Well, let's see what happens down the road. Foreign policy isn't I mean, it used to be, I should say, the strength of Joe Biden, but under this new current administration that is much further to the left of where Joe Biden has been his entire political career, foreign policy takes a back seat. And when it has a front seat, it's something like the Iran nuclear deal, where it's all about appeasement, or it's all about withdrawal, like we have in Afghanistan, or it's all about really wiping our hands of any responsibility, or giving up any real seat at the table or say in the future of what happens in these very critical decisions.
Lisa, a notorious Sicilian mafia killer known as the People Slayer, was released from just serving 25 years in prison. Giovanni Brusca, who's now 64 years of age, admitted to killing more than 100 people. How was this guy released after just 25 yees?
And it is so gruesome. If you read the details of this case, how he used to put I don't even want to, should I even say it on air, Cal? Put their remains in acid. I mean, it's not an image anybody wants to think about. But right, how is he back on the streets? And let's just hope that at a ripe age of 64, he's come to his senses. But I mean, 100 people, 100 people. This is, a lifelong murderer, and how he's even given a second chance, I'm not sure. But let's hope that some real changes have been made, and he lives a very different life now.
Yeah, because here in Canada, we hear about the concurrent life sentences down in the United States where people are locked up for 150, 200 years. So that's why we're shocked when we heard this guy's responsible for over 100 deaths, released after 25 years. Just simply unbelievable. U.S. political reporter and foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining us today from Los Angeles, California.
My pleasure.